Now
on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
It's 7:06. Thanks for tuning in here to America's Morning Show. It's O'Connor and Company on WMAL. Coming up at 7:35, Chuck Tease is going to join us to talk about the D.C. crime problem and what we saw in that hearing this week. Unbelievable. You know, we just can't arrest and prosecute our way out of a crime problem. When has that ever worked, Patrice?
Forever, except now, apparently.
At 8:05, Utah is one of those states standing shoulder to shoulder with Texas on the border against the federal government. We're going to speak with their attorney general coming up at 8:05. And at 8:35, Brent Bozell will join us from Media Research Center, talk about that hearing yesterday about big tech, Facebook, and TikTok. I'm Larry O'Connor. That is Patrice Onwuka.
Yes.
Patrice, you and I are both Marylanders, but we look with very keen interest in what happens to our brothers and sisters in Virginia.
We do.
And we are now in the middle of a legislative session where they've got Democrats now in charge of the Senate and the House of Delegates. But thankfully, still Glenn Youngkin is the governor. So any insanity that they try to push through, hopefully it will get vetoed. But it is a good insight into where the party in Virginia is when you see some of the pieces of legislation they're trying to push through. That brings us to Victoria Cobb with the Family Foundation, because there are some bills here, Victoria, that you're highlighting that don't seem real family friendly. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. Yeah, with November's elections, we have liberals in control of both chambers, and so there is no shortage of bad ideas, particularly those that go after parental rights, those ones that actively seek to undermine the parent and put the teacher or the health professional or the government in charge of your child.
Yeah. You know, there's this one, SB 235, Senator Hashmi has put it forth, and it says it has to do with a bill that Governor Youngkin was able to get through last year, or 2 years ago, in 2022, that just said merely that parents should be notified if there is sexually explicit material in the school. And Senator Hashmi, I guess, doesn't think parents should be notified about sexually explicit material?
Well, yeah, she's certainly trying to get at what we've seen in school board after school board, which is battles over which books are still permitted to be in the library, despite obviously the intention of what was done under the Youngkin administration earlier. So, yeah, it basically says none of these policies that he's created, that the DOE has created, none of them can be used to censor, and it's just a wide open to permit the censoring of books. So essentially, you read that, and it says all books shall be allowed. I mean, that is essentially the goal she is creating. And I think parents have spoken loudly in school board after school board about this.
Well, yeah, absolutely, Victoria. And just to push back on this idea that conservatives want to ban books, no, the books are available, but they're not for age-appropriate readers.
That's also exactly right.
Exactly. Now, also, just to shift a little bit, you also talked about, and I think you mentioned that there's a bill requiring parental notification around drug overdoses, and we just actually had on someone who's running for Congress in Virginia, raising this issue of kind of the fentanyl overdose and crisis, and we're seeing it popping up in our schools. Talk to us about that piece of legislation.
Well, I think our parents in Loudoun County are the ones that are particularly sensitive to this, as they had overdoses that they were not informed about for something like 20 days. And so we have a bill in there that simply says, look, if there are drug connected to school-related overdoses, we're going to tell parents. And what's stunning, and I think everyone needs to understand, is you've got the School Board Association, you've got the Virginia Education Association. They're down there fighting this, actively standing up in committee and saying, no, parents should not know when there are overdoses in their own child's school.
Unbelievable.
It is unbelievable. And again, I don't quite understand. And can you give them a little bit of, I don't want to say give them grace, but at the very least, have they communicated why they don't think it's a good idea to notify parents if their child is overdosed?
Oh, this is the balance of student privacy that they want to strike. That's what they would get up in committee and say. Yes, correct. Student privacy somehow impedes on a parent's right to be able to protect their own child from fentanyl.
Hold on.
That is what's being said.
I'm sorry. We just need to make sure that everyone, because, they're distracted. People are pouring their cup of coffee. Maybe, they just got cut off on the Beltway. It is now the position of the Democrat leadership in Richmond that if a child is using drugs and even overdosing on drugs, that they have a right to keep that private from their parents?
Well, we've gotten it out of committee, even with Democrats in charge. So we will see. We're going to keep pushing. It's just amazing that the unions and the base of the Democrat Party, those that put those people in office, are up there standing there fighting this. So we don't know yet the fate of the bill. I'd like to think reasonable minds will prevail. But it's amazing that parents who have kids in public schools should know that they have people within their school system actively fighting them down here in Richmond.
They sure should know that.
Well, and speaking of parental notification, I mean, Sage's Law, this is a great example of why parents need to know what's going on with their kids at school. Talk to us about what's going on with that.
Yeah, so remember, this is a law that is named after a young girl who became a victim of sex trafficking after her high school hid her name change. She was struggling with her identity. They hid her sessions with her counselor. And so long story short, we've got a bill that simply says, look, if there's going to be any school professional that interfaces with a child who's struggling over gender confusion, they've basically said, look, I want to be treated differently. That's the point at which you got to bring in the parent. The parent has to know that's going on. And we tried to push this the last couple of years. We're going to keep going with it this year. And I will tell you, it is an aggressive battle. And there are bills that are trying to do almost the exact opposite. So there's also a bill that people need to understand that is essentially saying that healthcare professionals, if you're 16, that healthcare professionals should be able to basically deem you mature and capable of making your own informed consent and pull the parent out of your health records and your decisions around mental health. So that's not always in the school system, but really there is an active effort to say at a certain point we're going to cut the parent out in schools or when they're sitting down with a health professional.
If I could just continue on Sage's Law, because we were so in favor of it and gave it such a platform here on our program. Now that Danica Rome was a member of the House of Delegates back when this was shot down, and Danica Rome was very much a part of leading the message on this. For people who don't remember, this is a transgender member of the House of Delegates. Now Danica Rome is in the Senate. And the message that was promoted is if you give parents notification of this intimate issue of a sexual nature and psychological nature, if you allow parents to know about this, if you don't keep this a secret from a child's parents, then a child is going to end up living on the streets and probably committing suicide. Is that where this debate is headed now? Sadly, Victoria, now that Danica is in the Senate, is this going to be the big battle cry?
Yes, this will be the battle cry, and this is what they say is that you're outing this child. So first of all, she or he is already out at the school, right? So you're not outing this child. This child has come forward and has said to a school professional, this is what I'm going through. I want to be treated differently. So they're out at school. It's just outing them to parents, who is the number one protector of that child, who is the person who can intercept when there is for example, a risk situation. For real, children struggle. We know they have mental health, but it is actually, studies will show the parent helping is the best way to prevent suicide or other detrimental behaviors as a result. So we're actually cueing in the right person at the right moment to ensure safety. And of course, in Sage's case, it would have prevented an entire devastation of situation, including sex trafficking. So, Well, I hope you were working there, Victoria, with the Republicans so that they can have the facts at their disposal and they're able to communicate and push back on this lie.
That's right.
This lie that keeping a parent excluded from these important, intimate, private issues with their own children and injecting the school system, a government bureaucrat keeping sexual secrets with a minor away from their parent, that in some way that's beneficial for the child, when in fact it's a detriment. Because you just said the parents are the primary caregivers. If Danica Rome and the Democrats in Richmond have their way, the parents won't be the primary caregivers. They won't be the people who are responsible. They think they're better at being responsible for these children, and it is absolutely outrageous. And I love what you're doing with the Family Foundation of Virginia, and I know that you are working with Republicans so they're able to compassionately and intelligently push back on that propaganda.
We are, and people can come down themselves. We're having a day where mama bears and papa bears come down and defend their kids and parental rights. On February 15th, they can come down to Richmond. We'll brief them. Then they can share with their legislators themselves their own stories and how important it is for them to play the role of a parent in the life of their child.
Brilliant. It's Mama Bear Day, by the way, February 15th, Mama Bear Day. If you go to familyfoundation.org/Mama Bear Day, you'll get all the info. And trust me, you papas, you better be there too. Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you, Victoria.
7:15 now, WMAL traffic and weather every 10